Welcome to 100 Stories for My Daughter. Here you'll find short and inspiring stories for children and adults about love, dreams, and believing in yourself. Each story is a small gift for the soul. Listen, share, and be inspired. In a cozy hollow high up in a tall oak tree lived Nika, a little squirrel who loved gathering acorns, walnuts, and chestnuts. Every day she hopped around the forest, collecting as many nuts as she could find. Her little paws darted from branch to branch, tucking each nut safely away in a hollow where they made a satisfying pile of treats. Nika loved her nuts. She liked to sit back and admire the growing stack of food in her hollow, feeling proud and safe, knowing she had more than enough for the winter. Each nut was like a tiny treasure, and her heart swelled with happiness every time she added a new one to her collection. "I'll be the luckiest squirrel in the forest this winter," she often said to herself, patting her stash with satisfaction. However, there was one thing Nika didn't do. She never shared her nuts. Even though she had plenty, she felt worried that if she started giving them away, she might not have enough when winter came. She would see other forest animals wandering by, some looking tired or hungry, but she'd shake her head and think, "They'll find their own food. My nuts are just for me." One bright autumn morning, as Nika sat admiring her overflowing stash, she noticed her friend, Kolya the hedgehog, down below. Kolya was slowly shuffling through the fallen leaves, sniffing here and there for food, his little nose twitching, but there wasn't much to find, and Kolya looked tired. Nika watched him for a moment, her heart tugging slightly. She thought about offering him a nut, just one, perhaps a small one. But then she glanced back at her hollow, thinking about how she might need every single one for herself. Shaking her head, she turned away, convincing herself that Kolya would find food somewhere else. But even as she tried to push the thought away, a tiny voice in her heart whispered, "What if Kolya needs it more than I do? Wouldn't one nut be worth it if it made him happy?" Nika didn't yet know it, but this small thought would soon lead her on a journey, one that would teach her that the real treasure isn't in what we keep, but in what we give away. The next day, Nika scampered around the forest, gathering more nuts and adding them to her stash. Her hollow was now so full that the nuts nearly spilled out whenever she added a new one. Just as she was about to climb up with another walnut, she saw Kolya the hedgehog again. He was wandering through the leaves, his small nose twitching as he searched for something to eat. Nika watched him for a moment. He looked tired, his little feet dragging as he shuffled from spot to spot. But there was almost no food left on the forest floor. Nika's heart felt a little tug again. She had more than enough, and it would take only one nut to make Kolya's search easier. But what if I end up needing it? She thought, glancing back at her stash. She looked down at Kolya, who was sniffing around without any luck, and then at her stash of nuts, which was so full she could barely fit any more. "Just one nut," she thought. "One won't make a difference to my stash. But for Kolya, it could mean a lot." Taking a deep breath, Nika scampered down the tree, a small walnut in her paws. She approached Kolya, who looked up at her in surprise. "Kolya," she began shyly, holding out the walnut, "I have a little extra, and I thought you might like this." Kolya's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. "Really, Nika? Oh, thank you. I've been searching for a long time, and it's been hard to find anything. This will be perfect." Nika handed him the walnut, feeling a strange warmth in her heart. As Kolya smiled, he nibbled on it right away, his face lighting up with happiness. "Thank you, Nika. This is the best walnut I've ever had." As Nika watched Kolya eat, she felt something she hadn't expected, a deep, happy feeling that made her heart feel fuller than even her stash of nuts. She had given up just one nut, but the joy in Kolya's eyes felt like a treasure of its own. As she returned to her tree, Nika realized that sharing hadn't taken anything away from her. It had only added something warm and wonderful to her heart. And as she climbed up to her hollow, she couldn't help but wonder if there were more friends in the forest who might feel as happy as Kolya had with just a small bit of help. Over the next few days, Nika continued gathering nuts, her stash growing larger by the hour. She felt proud of her work, but each time she looked at her hollow, she thought about Kolya's grateful face as he nibbled the walnut she'd given him. There was something about his happiness that kept returning to her, a feeling that had warmed her more than all the nuts in her hollow. One crisp morning, as she was climbing down to find more food, Nika spotted her friend Shustrik the rabbit nearby. Shustrik was hopping through the underbrush, his ears twitching as he searched for something to eat. He was usually full of energy, but today he looked a little tired and hungry. Nika hesitated, remembering how it felt to share with Kolya. She glanced back at her hollow, brimming with nuts, and felt a familiar tug in her heart. Gathering her courage, Nika picked up a small acorn and scampered over to Shustrik. "Hello, Shustrik," she called, her voice bright but a little nervous. "I thought maybe you'd like an acorn?" Shustrik's eyes lit up with surprise and gratitude. "Really, Nika? That's so kind of you. I've been hopping around all morning trying to find food." Nika handed him the acorn, her heart fluttering with both excitement and uncertainty. As Shustrik took a bite, his face broke into a wide, delighted grin. "This acorn is delicious. Thank you, Nika. You're a wonderful friend." A warm glow filled Nika's chest, and she couldn't help but smile. Seeing Shustrik's happiness felt better than adding any acorn to her stash. She realized that each time she gave a little, it didn't make her feel like she was losing something. Instead, it made her feel like she was gaining something much bigger: joy, kindness, and connection. After Shustrik thanked her and hopped away with a bounce in his step, Nika climbed back up to her hollow. She peered into her stash, seeing it in a new way. Before, she'd only thought about how her nuts would keep her comfortable, safe, and full during the cold winter. But now, she wondered if they could bring a kind of warmth to her friends too, a warmth that filled more than just an empty belly. Over the next few days, Nika began to notice more and more of her forest friends in need. She saw Chiri, the tiny bird, hopping about, pecking for seeds, and she scurried down with a small hazelnut. Chiri was delighted, her feathers puffing up with joy as she nibbled on it. Later, she met Liska the fox, who had been too busy caring for her little cubs to gather food. Nika nervously offered her a handful of acorns, and Liska accepted them with a grateful smile. As each friend accepted Nika's little gifts, she noticed a warmth blooming in her heart that grew stronger each time she shared. Her hollow was slowly beginning to empty, but her heart felt fuller than ever before. She had never felt so happy or connected to her friends, and for the first time, she realized that the happiness of others was becoming as precious to her as her stash of nuts. At night, as she curled up in her hollow, Nika no longer felt worried about her supply. Instead, she felt something much deeper, a trust in the forest, her friends, and the joy of giving. She was beginning to understand that sharing brought her something her stash of nuts never could, the warmth of friendship and a heart filled with kindness. As the leaves turned golden and the air grew crisper, Nika's daily routine began to change. Rather than racing around the forest, gathering every nut she could find, she spent her mornings looking out for her friends. She was no longer focused on making her stash the biggest or the fullest. Instead, she thought about who might need a little extra help. One chilly morning, as she made her way through the forest with a few walnuts, she spotted Pippa, the mouse, shivering under a pile of leaves. Pippa looked cold and hungry, her small paws trembling as she searched for food. "Good morning, Pippa," Nika called, scurrying over. "Are you looking for something to eat?" Pippa looked up, her whiskers twitching. "Oh, hello, Nika. I am. I couldn't find anything this morning. The colder it gets, the harder it is to find food." Nika's heart softened. She took one of the walnuts from her stash and held it out to Pippa. "Here, take this. It's one of my favorites, and I'd love for you to have it." Pippa's eyes sparkled with gratitude. "Thank you so much, Nika. This is more than enough for me. I'm so lucky to have a friend like you." As Nika watched Pippa nibble happily, she felt that familiar warmth filling her heart again. It was a feeling she now recognized, a kind of happiness that grew each time she shared a little of what she had with her friends. She realized that kindness didn't just bring smiles to her friends' faces, it filled her with a joy that made her feel rich in ways she'd never felt before. Later that day, Nika noticed Kolya the hedgehog again, curled up under a bush looking for a quiet spot to rest. This time, she didn't hesitate. She scampered over with a small acorn in her paws. "Kolya," she called gently, "would you like a snack?" Kolya looked up, surprised but pleased. "Nika, that would be wonderful. Thank you." He accepted the acorn gratefully, his prickly face breaking into a warm smile. "You're always so kind, Nika. I'll remember this when I have something special to share too." With each gift, Nika's hollow grew a little emptier, but her heart felt fuller than ever. She could now see her stash as more than just a collection for herself. Each nut had become an opportunity to bring warmth, kindness, and joy to someone else. She knew now that her collection wasn't just about her. It was a way to create happiness for everyone. As the days passed, other forest friends began to notice her generosity. Little by little, her acts of kindness became known throughout the forest, and soon friends would visit her hollow just to see her smile or to thank her for her thoughtfulness. And every evening, as Nika settled into her hollow, she found herself smiling. The joy she felt wasn't about the number of nuts she had left, but about the warmth she'd shared and the friendships she'd nurtured. The forest felt like a kinder, brighter place because of her little acts of giving. Nika now understood a beautiful truth, that sharing what she had didn't make her stash any less precious. In fact, it made it more special than ever. Her nuts had turned into moments of kindness, and she knew that as winter approached, her heart would stay warm, surrounded by friends whose happiness was now as much a part of her life as her own. The first snow fell gently over the forest, covering the trees, bushes, and ground with a soft blanket of white. Nika awoke in her hollow, stretching and feeling the crispness in the air. Winter had finally arrived. As she looked out, she saw her cozy tree and the world beyond wrapped in snow. Nika checked her hollow, noticing that her stash of nuts had grown smaller with each act of kindness. A small pang of worry tugged at her. Would she have enough to last through the winter? But the thought was quickly replaced by a warmth that had settled in her heart. She had shared her food with so many friends, and that joy had made her heart feel fuller than it ever had with just her stash of nuts. One chilly afternoon, as Nika huddled in her hollow, she heard a soft rustling outside. She peeked out and was surprised to see Kolya the hedgehog, bundled up in dried leaves, standing below her tree. His little paws held something wrapped in a leaf bundle. "Nika!" Kolya called, his voice bright despite the cold. "I brought you something." Nika climbed down eagerly. Kolya opened the leaf bundle, revealing a few plump berries he'd saved just for her. "I remembered how kind you were to me during the fall, so I wanted to bring you these. I found them just yesterday, and I thought you might like a little treat." Nika's eyes sparkled with surprise and gratitude. "Oh, Kolya, thank you so much. This is a wonderful surprise." She nibbled a berry, savoring the sweetness, and felt warmth blossom in her heart. Soon, more footsteps crunched in the snow, and to her delight, Shoestrick the rabbit appeared, holding a handful of dried clover he had saved. "Nika, I wanted to give you this," Shoestrick said, his nose twitching happily. "You helped me when I was hungry, and I'm so glad I can give something back." Before long, more of her friends began arriving. Pippa the mouse brought her a tiny acorn, and Liska the fox offered her a shiny chestnut. Cheery the bird chirped cheerfully as she presented Nika with a small seed. Each gift, though small, was given with gratitude and love, and Nika accepted each one, her heart overflowing with happiness. Mudrika, the wise owl, watched from a branch above and nodded approvingly. "Nika, you've shown us all how kindness spreads," she said warmly. "In giving, you receive so much more in return: friendship, love, and the joy of being surrounded by those who care about you." Nika looked around at her friends, each one smiling warmly. She realized that her hollow was now filled with not just food, but with the warmth of friendship and the joy of knowing that her kindness had come back to her more beautifully than she could have imagined. That evening, Nika sat in her hollow, surrounded by the gifts from her friends. As she nibbled on a clover leaf, she thought back to when she had been worried about sharing her stash. She now knew that her truest treasure wasn't in the number of nuts she'd collected, but in the friendship she had built and the kindness she had shared. Through the cold winter nights, Nika never felt alone or worried. She had friends who cared for her, and her hollow, though small, was filled with warmth and love. Nika had learned a beautiful truth, that giving from the heart brings its own kind of wealth, one that fills not only the hollow, but also the heart. And so, as the forest slept under the soft blanket of snow, Nika and her friends knew that kindness would keep them warm all winter long.